He was an ex-U.S. Marine, carrying memories of war that never truly let him go. With nearly all the money he had left, he bought an abandoned farm on the snowy outskirts of a small Montana town, searching for silence, not redemption. He thought he was alone, until one night during a brutal winter storm, his canine froze at the door and growled. Smoke drifted from a forgotten building. Inside were a frightened young woman, her 8-year-old son, and a past they were desperately running from. What began as a search for solitude became a test of faith, courage, and a quiet miracle buried beneath the snow. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe so you never miss another story of hope, loyalty, and second chances. Snow fell steadily over Ironwood Falls, Montana, muffling the world until even the wind seemed to whisper. Jack Miller arrived before dawn, his old pickup grinding to a halt at the edge of what used to be a working farm. The land lay half buried under snow, fences leaning like tired men, the farmhouse dark and hollow-eyed. Jack stood for a long moment before getting out of the truck, shoulders squared, breath slow, as if bracing for enemy fire instead of cold air. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that never quite softened even after years out of uniform. His dark hair was cropped short and already threaded with gray. His jaw sharp beneath a rough, uneven beard he no longer bothered to trim. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow, shrapnel, Afghanistan, and his eyes carried the same distant alertness he'd learned to keep alive overseas. Jack had been a U.S. Marine for nearly 2 decades. The war had ended for the world, but it hadn't ended inside him. He had spent almost everything he had, nearly all his savings, the last of his separation pay, on this abandoned place outside Ironwood Falls. Not because it was beautiful, not because it promised a future. He bought it because it was empty, quiet, far from people, from noise, from questions. He told himself he wasn't running. He was simply choosing silence. The only one who followed him inside that silence was Rex. The German Shepherd jumped down from the passenger seat the moment Jack opened the truck door, landing lightly despite his size. Rex was 7 years old, sable-coated with black along his back and warm brown through his legs and chest, his build lean and powerful rather than bulky. One ear bore a small notch from an old injury, and his amber eyes missed nothing. Rex had been a canine unit dog, trained for detection, protection, and patrol. He had served beside Jack overseas, learned the same rhythms of danger and waiting, the same instinct to watch corners and doorways. Since leaving the Marines, Rex had aged faster than Jack in some ways, slower in others. His muzzle was beginning to gray, but his posture was still rigid with purpose. Around strangers, he was controlled and wary. Around Jack, he was quiet, intensely loyal, almost gentle. During the first week, Jack focused on survival tasks. He patched broken windows with plastic and plywood, cleared snow from the roof, and repaired just enough of the plumbing to get cold water running. He spoke little, even to Rex, moving through the farmhouse like a man afraid that sound itself might wake something he'd buried. At night, when the cold crept through the walls and his thoughts grew louder than the wind, he took prescribed sleeping pills and lay on the floor beside Rex's bed, one hand resting against the dog's flank, grounding himself in the steady rise and fall of another living being. The property included a large, dilapidated barn and the smaller storage building behind it, half collapsed and long abandoned. Jack noticed it only in passing. He told himself he would check it eventually, when the snow eased and daylight stretched longer. For now, he stayed close to the house, to the narrow circle of control he could manage. It was on the fourth night that he heard it. A dull sound, barely more than a shift of air, somewhere beyond the farmhouse walls. Jack froze instantly, heart spiking, muscles tensing as they had so many times before. He held his breath, counting silently. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no voices, no second noise. Rex lifted his head but didn't growl. "Wind," Jack muttered, though he didn't believe it. The sounds returned the next evening. A faint metallic scrape, followed by something like a soft thud. Jack stood by the window, scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Snow blurred the distance, swallowing shapes and depth. His mind filled the gaps with old images, compounds, shadows, movement where there should have been none. He exhaled slowly and forced himself to step back. Ironwood Falls was quiet, too quiet for trouble. By the sixth night, exhaustion dulled his edge. Jack finished reinforcing the front door, fed Rex, and swallowed his pills earlier than usual. The storm worsened after midnight, snow piling fast, wind howling hard enough to rattle the walls. Jack slept heavily, dragged under by chemicals and fatigue. Rex did not sleep. Sometime before dawn, the dog rose without sound, his ears flattened, his body angling toward the back of the property. A low, controlled growl vibrated in his chest. Not fear, not aggression, but warning, the kind that came before action. The sound cut through Jack's dreams like a blade. Jack sat up instantly, pulse racing. Rex? The dog was already moving, positioning himself between Jack and the back door, hackles raised. His gaze locked on the darkness beyond the glass, toward the old storage building Jack had ignored since arriving. Snow drove sideways now, thick and relentless, but Rex's attention did not waver. Jack followed his line of sight, every marine instinct screaming that something was wrong. He hadn't checked that building. He hadn't cleared it. He had assumed emptiness, because emptiness was what he wanted. Rex let out another low growl, deeper this time, and stepped forward, blocking Jack's path as if to say, "Not yet." Jack reached for his coat, his breath shallow, eyes narrowing toward the unseen structure buried in snow. For the first time since arriving in Ironwood Falls, the silence around him didn't feel empty at all. It felt occupied. The storm had not eased by morning. Snow pressed against the farmhouse windows in thick sheets, blurring the world into a single colorless mass. And the wind carried a low, constant moan that settled into Jack Miller's bones. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside with Rex at his side, boots sinking deep as they moved toward the storage building behind the barn. Up close, the structure looked worse than he remembered. Rotted wood, a door hanging crooked on one hinge, the lock long broken. The smell reached him first, smoke, faint but unmistakable, mixed with damp hay and cold metal. Jack's hand tightened around the flashlight as he pushed the door open. Inside, the beam cut through dust and frost and landed on two figures huddled near a rusted barrel where embers still glowed weakly. The woman rose first, stiff with fear, placing herself in front of the child. She was young, mid to late 20s at most, slim to the point of fragility, her shoulders narrow beneath an oversized coat that clearly wasn't hers. Her dark brown hair hung unevenly to her shoulders, as if cut in haste, and her face was pale with exhaustion, skin roughened by cold. Her eyes were sharp despite the fear in them, eyes that had learned to watch closely, to measure danger quickly. The boy behind her clutched her coat with small, red-numbed hands. He was about 8, thin, with light brown hair falling into his eyes and a smudge of soot on his cheek. He stared at Jack, not with panic, but with wary curiosity, as if trying to decide what kind of man stood before him. Jack froze. Years of training told him to assess, to command, to control the situation. Years of war told him that sudden movement led to screams. He raised his free hand slowly, palm open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady, though his pulse hammered in his ears. Rex stood half a step ahead of him, muscles taut, head high, eyes locked on the woman. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He waited. "My name's Emily," the woman said after a moment, her voice thin but firm. "This is my son, Noah." She did not lower her guard. "We didn't know anyone lived here. We thought the place was abandoned." Jack believed her. The building looked as if it hadn't been used in years, and the fire was small, carefully managed. The kind made by someone who knew how dangerous it was to draw attention. He glanced at Noah again. The boy's cheeks were cracked from cold, his lips dry, but his eyes were bright. Too bright for someone who'd slept warm. "How long?" Jack asked. 2, maybe 3 nights, Emily said. "We come after dark. We leave before sunrise. We didn't touch the house." Her words rushed out now, urgency breaking through control. "The storm got worse. We couldn't move last night." Jack's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavier than the snow on the roof. This land was supposed to be empty, silent. But he also saw what the cold had already done to them, and what another night outside might finish. "You can stay," he said finally, each word costing him something. "Just tonight. When the storm passes, you leave. You stay here, away from the house." Emily's shoulders sagged with relief so sudden it almost knocked her off balance. She nodded quickly. "Thank you. We won't cause trouble." "I promise." Jack turned away before she could say more. He didn't trust gratitude. He trusted rules. He returned with blankets, a thermos of hot water, and a can of soup he set near the barrel. He avoided standing too close, kept his movements deliberate and predictable. Rex followed him back inside, but the dog paused at the door, glancing once over his shoulder at Noah before obeying. That night, Jack lay awake longer than usual. He told himself it was the storm, the unfamiliar presence, the old instincts resurfacing. He listened for sounds from the storage building, but heard only wind and the distant creak of frozen wood. When sleep finally took him, it was shallow and broken. Sometime before dawn, he felt Rex rise beside him. The dog did not pace or whine. He simply stood, ears forward, and walked toward the back door. Jack followed silently, pulling on his boots. Through the snow, he saw Rex slip into the storage building and settle beside the small pile of blankets where Noah slept. The boy's breathing was uneven, but calm. Emily sat awake nearby, eyes wide, watching Rex with a mix of fear and wonder. "He won't leave," she whispered. Jack didn't answer. He watched as Rex positioned himself between the boy and the open door, body angled outward, alert but still. It was the posture of protection Jack had seen 100 times before, on patrol, on watch, guarding something that mattered. He felt a tightness in his chest he didn't have a name for. This was supposed to be temporary, one night. But Rex, it seemed, hadn't gotten the memo. Morning came pale and slow, the storm loosening its grip just enough to reveal a sky the color of old steel. Snow still lay thick across the land, but the wind had softened and sound returned in small pieces. The creak of frozen wood, the distant crack of ice shifting in the trees. Jack Miller stood outside the storage building with a thermos in one hand and a toolbox in the other, watching Rex pace a careful perimeter. The dog's posture had changed since the night before. He was still alert, but there was something steadier in his movements now, as if he had accepted a new responsibility without question. Noah emerged first, bundled in layers that were too thin for the cold but worn with quiet determination. In daylight, Jack could see him more clearly. A small boy for his age, all sharp elbows and knees, his face pale but expressive. There was a stubborn set to his mouth that didn't belong to a child who'd been protected all his life. He watched Jack work with open interest, not fear, stepping closer when Rex glanced back at him and gave a single approving huff. "You were really a Marine?" Noah asked, breaking the silence as Jack replaced a warped plank along the wall. Jack paused. He hadn't expected questions so soon, especially not from a child. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Did you go to war?" Jack felt the old tightening in his chest, the reflex to shut the door, to deflect. But Noah wasn't staring at him like someone waiting for a story. He looked like someone trying to understand the shape of the world. "I did," Jack said. Noah nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Is that why you don't sleep much?" Jack glanced at him sharply. The boy met his eyes without flinching. There was no accusation there, only observation. "Something like that," Jack replied. He expected the questions to stop. They didn't. "Is Rex a soldier too?" Jack almost smiled. "He was," he said. "Best one I ever worked with." Rex chose that moment to sit beside Noah, pressing his weight gently against the boy's leg. Noah leaned into him instinctively, fingers disappearing into thick fur. Jack watched the interaction with a strange mix of discomfort and familiarity. Rex had always responded well to calm voices, to people who didn't move like threats. But this was different. This was personal. Emily remained near the doorway, keeping watch while pretending not to. In the daylight, Jack could see the strain etched into her posture. She stood tall despite her slight frame, chin lifted, eyes scanning the tree line whenever sound carried too far. Her face held the marks of someone who had learned to endure, small lines at the corners of her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that never quite relaxed. When Jack offered to reinforce the building against the cold, she hesitated before nodding, pride warring with necessity. As Jack worked, Emily spoke more, cautiously at first. She told him they'd been moving from place to place for months, staying wherever they could without being noticed. When she mentioned Noah's father, her voice flattened, words becoming precise and careful. The man had been volatile, she said, not always violent, but unpredictable, controlling, the kind of anger that simmered until it exploded without warning. Leaving him had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, and the most dangerous. Jack didn't press for details. He knew that tone too well, the sound of someone recounting only what they could afford to remember. Instead, he focused on the work, sealing gaps, insulating the walls, making the space warmer, safer. It was easier to act than to speak. By afternoon, the storage building felt less like a shelter of desperation and more like a place someone could survive. Jack handed Noah a pair of old gloves far too large for his hands. The boy grinned, slipping them on anyway. "Thanks," he said, as if the gesture mattered more than the object itself. That evening, as the light faded, Jack walked the perimeter of the property out of habit more than concern. Rex followed at his heel, nose low, attentive. Near the back fence, something caught Jack's eye. A disturbance in the snow, subtle but unmistakable. He crouched, studying it carefully. The imprint was too clean, too deliberate. A boot, recent. Jack straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. Emily and Noah were still inside, unaware. The storm had hidden many things, but not this. The tracks led toward the road, not away from it. Jack felt the quiet around him shift, the sense of isolation giving way to something sharper, more focused. Whatever peace he'd bought with his savings had come with a price he was only beginning to understand. The tracks near the fence stayed in Jack Miller's mind long after the light faded. He did not mention them to Emily that morning, but the tension settled into his shoulders, pulling him upright, sharpening his senses. PTSD had a way of returning without warning, not as memory, but as readiness. Heart rate climbing, hearing narrowing, every sound weighed for threat. Rex mirrored the change. The dog's movements grew precise, deliberate. His nose lingered toward the tree line, drawing in cold air as if it carried answers. Snow muffled the forest, yet Rex kept testing it, head lifting, ears pivoting, posture taut with restrained force. Jack resumed work with mechanical focus, reinforcing hinges and clearing a narrow path between the storage building and the farmhouse in case they needed to move quickly. He avoided the house interior, preferring the cold that kept his thoughts clean. Emily watched him from the doorway, reading the shift in his behavior. In daylight, she looked more worn than frightened, slim, pale, with a faint bruise-yellow shadow along one wrist she kept tucked into her sleeve. She moved with care, economical and quiet, a woman who had learned not to draw attention. When Jack finally spoke, it was not to explain, but to ask a single question. "Is he looking for you?" Emily inhaled, then nodded once. "For Noah," she said, voice steady but stripped bare. "He doesn't care about me. He wants his son." She did not say the man's name. She did not need to. She described him instead. Tall, broad, early 40s, beard always trimmed too neatly, eyes that smiled only when people were watching. A man who could be charming in public and cruel in private, who never hit first, only after he was certain there would be no witnesses. Leaving him had been a slow calculation, documents gathered in secret, nights planned around the boy's sleep, a single chance taken when the weather turned bad and the roads emptied. "He knows how to find us," Emily said. "He always does." Jack listened without interruption. He recognized the pattern immediately, the quiet control, the strategic cruelty. He had seen men like that in uniform and out, men who believed ownership was the same as love. He felt the old anger stir, not hot, but precise. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Emily looked at him then, really looked, as if weighing whether to believe it. By afternoon, the sky dimmed again, clouds stacking heavy and low. Jack retrieved an old shortwave radio from a crate he had nearly thrown away, olive casing, chipped paint, the antenna bent but intact. He set it on a crate near the doorway and worked the dial, coaxing static into fragments of sound. The signal wavered, rising and falling like breath. A man's voice cut in briefly, distant and broken, then vanished. Jack tried again, adjusting the antenna, angling it toward the open door. Nothing held, The storm had a habit of swallowing signals, and the valley did the rest. He left the radio on, volume low, a thin thread of hope humming beneath the static. The power went out just before dusk. The storage building fell into a soft, gray twilight, the fire their only light. Rex lifted his head at once, muscles bunching as if the darkness itself had weight. Noah drew closer to Emily, fingers curling into her coat. Jack lit a lantern and set it near the door, then stepped outside to check the generator he hadn't yet repaired. The cold struck him cleanly, biting through his jacket. He scanned the road, the fence, the tree line. Nothing moved. The world felt paused, breath held. When he turned back, a glint caught his eye. Far off, near the road where the snow thinned into packed ice, a shape resolved slowly as he focused. A vehicle, dark against the white, idling or parked, too distant for details. It had not been there earlier. Jack crouched, letting the night swallow his outline, and watched. The vehicle did not approach. It did not leave. It waited. He returned to the storage building without comment, setting the lantern down more carefully than before. Rex pressed closer to Noah, positioning himself between the boy and the door, eyes never leaving the darkness beyond. Emily read Jack's face and understood without words. Her jaw tightened. "He found us," she said quietly. "Not yet," Jack replied. He kept his voice low, even. "But he's close." He checked the radio again. Static surged, then a voice surfaced long enough to confirm what Jack already knew. Weather warnings, road closures, no clear reception until morning. He shut it off. "We stay put tonight." Jack took the first watch, sitting just inside the doorway, lantern dimmed, breath measured. The power stayed out. The storm gathered itself again. Outside, the vehicle remained a shadow at the edge of the world. Inside, Rex held his position, steady as stone, guarding what mattered. Jack understood then that the quiet he had come here to find was gone, replaced by something older and more dangerous. The past had not followed him. It had been waiting. By nightfall, the storm arrived with a force Jack Miller had only seen a handful of times in his life. The kind that erased roads, swallowed sound, and pressed the world flat. Snow slammed into the buildings in thick, blinding sheets, and the wind howled hard enough to make the walls tremble. Ironwood Falls disappeared entirely, cut off from power, signal, and sight. The farmhouse and storage building became a single island in a white sea. Jack moved with purpose, pulling shutters tight, reinforcing doors with lengths of salvaged wood, checking lines and locks by lantern light. Rex stayed close, muscles coiled, tracking the storm with the same focus he once reserved for hostile ground. Noah's fever rose quickly. The boy lay curled on a thin mattress near the fire, cheeks flushed deep red, skin hot beneath Jack's hand. His breathing came shallow and uneven, lips parting as if each breath required effort. Emily hovered over him, her composure unraveling as the thermometer climbed. She was shaking, not from cold, but from the kind of fear that stripped thought down to instinct. Her hair, usually tied back tight, had come loose around her face, dark strands clinging to damp skin. "We have to go," she said, voice breaking. "If he's out there, if the roads are gone." Jack cut in gently but firmly. "He can't move in this," he said. "Neither can you." He met her eyes and held them. "And Noah won't survive the cold." The words landed heavy but true. Emily's shoulders sagged as reality replaced panic. She nodded once, swallowing hard, then turned back to her son. Jack fetched water, medication from his kit, extra blankets. He adjusted the fire, rationed fuel, calculated hours and contingencies the way he always had. The storm raged, but inside the building, order took shape. Jack transformed the place into a fortress without walls. He set up the generator in a sheltered nook, tested it until it sputtered to life, then shut it down to conserve fuel. He positioned lanterns to eliminate shadows near entry points, cleared a narrow path between structures, and marked footing in the snow with stakes so no one would lose direction in the whiteout. Rex watched every move, ears swiveling, occasionally lifting his head to scent the air as if the storm carried messages. When Jack finished, he knelt by Noah again, steadying the boy's head as he sipped water. "You're doing good," Jack murmured. Noah's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, then closed. Emily sank onto a crate, hands clenched together. "I can't lose him," she said, the words raw now. Jack crouched in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the scar through his eyebrow, the lines carved by years of tension. "You won't," he said. "Not tonight." He meant it as a promise, not hope. The storm peaked after midnight. Snow piled against doors, wind screaming like a living thing. Rex froze mid-step, a low growl rolling out of him, deep, sudden, unmistakable. Jack felt the shift before he saw it, the same way a room changed when someone entered behind you. He grabbed the lantern and moved to the doorway. Outside, the world was chaos, visibility near zero. Then he saw it, a pinprick of light, distant but deliberate, cutting sideways through the snow near the tree line. A flashlight. It flickered once, twice, then steadied. Rex's growl rose, his body angling between the light and the building, stance wide and immovable. Emily gasped softly behind Jack. He dimmed the lantern and crouched, heart pounding but mind clear. The light moved slowly, cautiously, testing the storm, probing. Whoever held it knew the weather was cover. Jack scanned angles, distances, remembered terrain. The road lay beyond the trees. The vehicle from earlier would be useless now. This was a man on foot, stubborn or desperate enough to try. Jack leaned close to Rex's ear and whispered a command. The dog went still, silent now, eyes locked forward. Jack extinguished the lantern entirely, plunging the room into firelight and shadow. He positioned himself at the doorway, breath slow, counting the seconds between gusts. The light paused, vanished, then reappeared closer. Jack did not move. He would not give away position. He would let the storm do its work. Minutes stretched. The light wavered, then dipped as if the holder stumbled. Rex's growl returned, sharper. Jack raised a hand, steadying him. The light jerked sideways and disappeared into the white. Jack waited longer than felt comfortable, then longer still. Finally, he relit the lantern just enough to see Rex's eyes soften a fraction, tension easing but not gone. The storm reclaimed the night. Jack turned back inside. Emily clutched Noah, tears tracking down her cheeks in the firelight. "He was here," she whispered. Jack nodded once. "Not tonight," he said again. He took first watch, sitting with his back to the door, eyes on the dark, listening to the storm breathe. Rex lay at his feet, head up, guarding the thin line between danger and the people sleeping behind him. The storm did not end. It thinned just enough to lie. Snow still fell hard, but the wind shifted, carving lanes of silence between gusts. Jack Miller sensed the change before he saw it, the way a Marine senses an opening that shouldn't exist. He rose from his watch position without sound, sliding the lantern hood lower until only a thin amber slit remained. Rex lifted his head at once, ears angled forward, body already aligned to the doorway. The flashlight reappeared beyond the trees, closer than before, its beam careful now, disciplined. Whoever held it had learned something during the night. Jack moved first. He shut the generator down completely, plunging the building into firelight and shadow. Darkness was a tool, and he intended to use it. He stepped outside, keeping low, letting the storm's hiss cover his movement. The ground was treacherous, snow crust over powder, but Jack knew where the drifts were deepest. He circled wide, guiding the light without revealing himself, angling the approach away from the storage building and toward a shallow ravine that cut the property's edge. The man emerged from the trees with the cautious confidence of someone used to being obeyed. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wrapped in a heavy winter jacket that strained against his frame. His beard was trimmed tight, dark hair slicked back beneath a knit cap, face set into a practiced calm that didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes scanned with intent, calculating angles, distances, exits. He carried himself like a person who believed he had the right to take what he wanted. When the beam hit the snow stakes Jack had planted earlier, the man paused, reassessing. Jack let the storm breathe, then cracked the generator back on for half a second, just enough to throw a rectangle of light across the yard, before killing it again. The sudden illumination drew the man forward, reflexive. He stepped into deeper snow and stumbled, cursing under his breath. Jack moved then, closing the distance without charging, letting the man recover just enough to keep him moving in the wrong direction. Rex broke cover with a low, rolling growl, not an attack, but a warning that set the man's nerves on edge. The dog's silhouette cut across the snow, powerful and precise, placing himself between the man and the storage building with absolute clarity. "Easy," the man muttered, flashlight shaking as he tried to track both darkness and dog. He took a step back, then another. Jack appeared behind him, voice level, unmistakable. "You're done." The man spun, slipping again, flashlight skittering across the snow. He reached for Jack, desperation sharpening his movements. Jack didn't strike. He redirected, hooking an arm, using the man's momentum against him, forcing him down into the drift. The cold did the rest. The man struggled, breath tearing, strength bleeding away as panic replaced control. Jack kept pressure steady, measured, until the fight drained out of him. "It's over," Jack said again, not as a threat, but as a fact. Rex held position, teeth bared but still, waiting for release that never came. Jack rose, stepped back, creating distance. He pointed toward the trees. "Leave," he said. "Now." The man hesitated, hatred flashing across his face. Then the storm howled, and choice vanished. He staggered up and fled, disappearing into the white. Jack waited, counting breaths, until the night reclaimed him. Inside, the radio crackled. Jack froze, then crossed to it in 2 steps. Static surged, then a voice broke through, faint but clear enough. "Emergency traffic only, road closures, responders staged at Ironwood Falls, repeat." Jack keyed the mic, relaying coordinates, conditions, the presence of a hostile individual. The reply came clipped and professional, promising movement when the storm eased. Jack shut the radio off, relief sharp and unfamiliar. He knelt by Noah. The boy's fever had broken slightly. Sweat cooled on his skin. Rex lay beside him now, head on paws, eyes half-lidded but vigilant. Noah stirred, lips moving. "Don't go, Dad," he whispered, the word slipping out unguarded, meant for someone else or for the shape of safety he felt beside him. Jack stilled. He did not answer. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder and stayed until the storm softened again, guarding the thin line he had chosen not to cross. Weeks passed with a steadiness that surprised Jack Miller. The storm loosened its grip day by day, leaving behind a land reshaped by snow and silence. Plows returned to the county roads, power flickered back to life, and patrol vehicles traced familiar routes again. Jack watched from the farmhouse porch as deputies finished their last sweep of the property, their breath fogging the air, their movements efficient and unhurried. The threat had been catalogued, statements taken, lines drawn where none had existed before. The world, it seemed, had remembered them. Emily packed carefully, folding clothes with a precision born of habit. She had gained color in her cheeks since the storm, the tightness in her shoulders easing. In daylight, she looked younger than Jack had first thought. Early 30s, slim but stronger than her frame suggested. Her hair, dark and straight, fell past her shoulders now that she no longer cut it in haste. She moved with a new confidence, still cautious but no longer braced for impact. The social worker assigned to her case, a middle-aged woman named Karen Holt with cropped blonde hair, wire-frame glasses, and a practical calm, had visited twice, explaining options, timelines, safe housing. Karen spoke plainly and listened more than she talked, the kind of professional who understood that trust arrived late and left easily. Noah improved quickly. His fever stayed down, appetite returned, and color warmed his face. He followed Rex everywhere, steps light and determined, talking to the dog as if he were a person who understood everything. Rex tolerated the attention with quiet patience, eyes soft, posture relaxed but alert. He was older now, joints a little stiffer in the mornings, but his presence carried the same assurance it always had, steady, watchful, kind in a way that did not demand anything back. Jack spent those weeks repairing what the storm had damaged and finishing what he had started. He fixed the generator properly, replaced warped boards, and insulated the storage building until it held heat through the night. He slept more. Not well, not deeply, but enough. The pills stayed in their bottle more often than not. When he caught himself listening for threats that never came, he breathed and waited until the moment passed. He did not tell anyone how hard that still was. He did not have to. On the morning Emily and Noah were set to leave, the sky hung low and pale, snow falling in fine, quiet grains. The county truck arrived first, then Karen's sedan. Emily knelt to Noah's height, smoothing his hair, explaining again where they were going and why. He nodded, accepting the change with a seriousness beyond his years. When he stood, he looked at Jack, then at Rex, then back again. "I'll come back," he said, not asking permission. Jack nodded. He felt the old instinct to keep distance rise, then settle. "You're welcome any time," he said. It was not a promise made lightly. Emily stepped closer, her breath catching once before she spoke. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. Jack met her gaze, I did, he replied, and meant that too. The truck pulled away slowly, tires crunching over snow. Jack stood until it disappeared around the bend, then turned back to the house. The quiet returned, but it was different now. No longer hollow, no longer a place to hide. He walked through the rooms with a measured calm, seeing what could be done, what could be opened. The storage building had held 3 people through the worst storm of the year. It could hold more. He made the decision without ceremony. Jack called Karen later that afternoon and asked about emergency winter placement, how it worked, what it required, who needed it most. He listened carefully, asked practical questions, wrote notes. By evening, he had a plan. The farmhouse would remain his, but the outbuildings would be ready. Heat, cots, food, rules. No violence, no questions that weren't volunteered. A place to stay when staying alive was hard. That night, snow fell again, light and patient. Jack stood on the porch with Rex at his side as headlights appeared on the road, Emily's car returning, slower this time. She stepped out with Noah, bundled and smiling, the social worker waiting behind them. Karen nodded to Jack, understanding in her eyes. The 4 of them stood together beneath the falling snow, breath visible, shoulders close. Rex leaned against Noah's leg. Jack rested a hand on the porch rail, steady and present. The winter was still cold, the world still sharp at the edges, but no one stood alone in it anymore. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder from the sky or blinding light. They come quietly, through a door opened on a frozen night, through a choice to stay instead of walking away, through a wounded heart that still dares to love. This is often how God works in our daily lives, not loudly, not forcefully, but patiently, waiting for us to step toward the light. If today you feel tired, lonely, or afraid, remember this: you are not forgotten. A miracle may begin with something small, staying a little longer, listening a little deeper, believing a little more. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to walk with us again. May God bless you, protect you, and grant peace to you and your loved ones, today and always.